We turn now to the chairman of the world's biggest insurance market, here to tell us how regulatory reform is unfolding overseas as well as here, the state of the business in his industry and his thoughts on the economy. We're joined by Lord Peter Levene, chairman of Lloyd's of London. Lord Levene, thank you so very much for being here. You had an opportunity to present an award to Chesley Sullenberger, Sully, the hero, the guy who landed the U.S. Airways plane on the Hudson a few months ago. But a question for you here. At the same time as you were presenting this award, you took the opportunity to make some remarks, in particular about protectionism. And I want to just get people's thoughts clear on the subject. Are you speaking about protectionism as it concerns financial services, or protectionism in general? And if it does involve financial services, why is it an issue in your mind?
Well, I was talking about protectionism in general, but financial services is no different from anywhere else. And, you know, having had a period of globalization, which everybody praised, it had its costs, certainly. But you can't start working backwards from that and saying, you know, we're all going to look internally. And, you know, American jobs for American workers, British jobs for British workers, Chinese jobs for Chinese workers. That's not going to help anybody get out of the mess that we're in.
Do you perceive the protectionist faction that does exist here in the United States to be having some influence on the efforts to regulate financial services here?
I think subconsciously it does up to a point. I mean, we've had an issue here for years and years and years in a significant part of our business for reinsurance, where we have to post collateral here, in other words, cash, to the value of 100% of the business we write. U.S. businesses have to post nothing. Now, you can't have anything much more protectionist than that. Does that have a bad effect on the business? It's not huge, but it creates the wrong sort of atmosphere. And when that spills over into what we call the real economy, it's not going to help anyone.
So I take it then from your perspective, it's a problem that the efforts being undertaken right now to re-regulate financial services in the U.S. on the other side of the Atlantic aren't being harmonized more.
They need to be harmonized because, as we saw with all the problems 18 months ago, when something happened in New York, it had an effect in London minutes later, and vice versa. So you can't just say, look, this is my market, I'll do it the way I want to, and it doesn't matter about anybody else. I think there is an effort being made, but the real efforts are being made nationally. And if somebody doesn't keep an eye on how these are going to work internationally, it will be difficult.
Let's speak, though, about those national efforts, because just last week we had the EU leaders meeting to try and hammer out some coordinated plan on regulating financial services, and the one country that actually threw us a wrench into the works was the UK, in fact, on banking regulation.
Absolutely, because, you know, the two world centres for financial services are London and New York. Certainly in the UK, we have been well in the lead in Europe. And we're not going to throw that away if we're going to get into regulation which is made in Brussels by people who haven't taken sufficient cognizance of the way in which London has worked and where it is working. Now, that doesn't mean to say we don't need new regulation. What we've said is that we should have a regulator who is a sort of overseer to make sure that everybody is pulling to a general policy, but let the details of regulation in each country in Europe be worked out as they suit that market and as they can work together, and not have a situation where there's a one-size-fits-all approach.
But how do we take that and at the same time reconcile it with the need for harmonious regulation? It seems to me that in its simplest form, all the rules should be the same, not different for every country.
Well, that, you know, in an ideal world, that would be great. But we don't live in an ideal world, and different countries operate in different ways. What you have to do is to find, yeah, you need harmonious regulation, but you need to have it adapted to local requirements so that the big picture is the same. But when it comes to the detail of applying the regulation, you have it done in such a way that it suits the local market.
What is the single biggest risk as you see it right now as we try, as governments around the world try to rein in excesses of financial services?
Well, I think the biggest risk is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, to say we now have this industry regulated so tight that nothing can ever go wrong. That's fine, except that you won't get any business that way. You know, there is always risk in business. If you remove all risk that possibly exists, then business can't operate. You have to operate with an acceptable degree of risk, and you have to have regulation which allows you to work within parameters that have been laid down centrally. They can be laid down by the EU, as long as the detailed regulation is sorted out by each country as it suits their market.
All right, Lord Peter Levene, thank you very much for joining us. Lord Levene is chairman of Lloyd's of London here in New York, sitting down with us this morning.